this school refusal has, become such a huge problem just in the last few years, right? I think that a lot of the schools that I talk to anyway are so overwhelmed by the amount of children that are just refusing to come to school. They're overwhelmed by it. It's a win-win for everybody if we could figure out the answer. So I look at a lot of these IEPs and I say, I think there's good intention here, but these are the wrong accommodations. Hello, pod people. Welcome to this week's episode of
Why do people do that?
So today we have my wonderful friend, Susan Deedy, Esquire. She is a special ed attorney, and we have so many wonderful things we like to talk about, Sue and I, but there is definitely, some topics that are really, really, really important to us, and we thought it would be great to come on here and have this conversation for all of you so that we can shed some light on some really important topics. So I am going to pass the mic over to Sue for a moment because I think that Sue will do a much better job of explaining to you who she is and what she does, because she is the master of who she is and I am not. So take it away, Sue. Who are you?
So thank you. And it's really great to be here.
Yeah.
So the law offices of Susan Deedy, what we do essentially is represent parents of students, many of whom have disabilities, not all, and ensure that school districts are following the law, um, making sure that students receive the proper services, schools are in compliance, um, and really protecting parents' rights and, of course, students' rights to make sure they're receiving the right education, that they're going to school in the appropriate educational environment, that they're safe, and they're receiving what they're legally entitled to. So it's the best area of law to practice. I love it. There's a lot to be done, and I'm really excited to talk today about a topic that I see a lot of. And today we're talking about school anxiety and avoidance. And so both Stacy and I, our practices sort of overlap. We handle sort of the same population, but from different perspectives.
Can I just back up for a second, ask a question?
Yeah.
Like when you went to law school, is special ed law, like was that a specialty? Because up until today, I didn't realize that was even a thing or a need.
A lot of people don't even know it exists. And no, I didn't have any idea. I was fortunate enough to fall into it. I started off representing school districts. I worked at the general counsel's office at the City University of New York, right out of law school. And then from there, I represented the New York City Department of Education, again, representing school districts.
And now you're on the other side,
and now I'm on
representing the
the
families.
exactly. And now I'm on the other side. And what I found representing the DOE, which is a very big bureaucratic system, is there's a lot of mistakes. And I just felt more passionate being on the other side. And so that's what I did. And
You found your niche.
I found my niche.
Yeah, really making such an amazing difference in the lives of children of all ages that are really struggling sometimes within the system and bringing to light, the different options for them that maybe sometimes parents don't even know exist, right? Like you don't even know, and I think most people don't even know that there's such a thing.
Yeah. I
as
mean, I was
special ed
fortunate to
law.
not have that need, with my daughter. But yeah, I would never have even thought that that was a thing, that school districts wouldn't, I recognize that school districts are kind of uneducated with certain things and might not be providing the best care or following IEPs and doing the right thing for the student. But I completely lost my train of thought. Damn it.
It's a huge area of law,
Yeah.
and it's so specialized. There really aren't, as many attorneys handling this area of law. So,
Keeps you busy.
exactly.
Yeah, so I'm definitely excited to dive into this topic because I know in special education law, there are so many different things we could talk about. However, like you mentioned, school anxiety and school refusal or school avoidance is a very hot topic, which has unfortunately really ticked up since COVID. So it's definitely an important thing to dive into. Before we do, really quickly, just in case anybody is watching this and they're like, wow, I didn't know this was a thing and I could really use the support. Can you just share with us quickly if anybody does want to connect with you or call you or find you or learn more about you? Where do they do that?
Sure. So they can go on our website, susanddidilaw.com. Our offices are located in Westbury. So it's pretty easy to find us that way, Susan Didi Law Office.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So let's jump in. Let's talk about school avoidance and school refusal. So let's start with because I definitely want us to have the opportunity because like you mentioned it overlaps, right? You're looking at this from the law perspective and you're representing the kids and their families and as a psychotherapist and a group practice owner who works very closely with children and families, we're seeing the mental health part of it and we're kind of jumping in and helping them with the anxiety in that way. So let's start with you. What are you seeing and why do you feel like now is the time to kind of come in here and shed some more awareness about this to the people that watch and listen so that we can learn more about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I will say that, our cases of school anxiety have just dramatically increased within, I'm going to say, the last several years, certainly since COVID. Um, but, I think there are a whole host of reasons that we can discuss and try to figure out. But
All age groups, or are you seeing it more in high school?
yeah, that's a good question, actually.
Really all ages,
Mhm.
but more often middle school and high school. And you know, there can be so many reasons, but it's such a prevalent issue, and the way that it's handled is so important because school districts sometimes don't understand the root of the problem, and very often we see there be the sort of the idea that the student is sort of intentionally being non-compliant and not going to school because they don't want to go to school. Nobody wants to get up in the morning and go to their job or school, but we all have to do what we have to do. No,
Mhm.
that's not what this is about. This is about an actual anxiety for a specific reason, and understanding why will help the school district figure out how to appropriately address it. Um, and legally, they are responsible and have the obligation to handle it in a certain way and to address it and not to leave it really sort of to as an emotional issue and we're in the business of educating. No, I mean, the student has to feel like they can get to school and those issues have to be addressed. So there is an obligation on the part of the school district to address this issue, this growing issue that I know they're seeing as well.
So if you were to help the school, what would you really want to tell them? What would you want them to understand and know that it appears that they don't know? And I see that too. And I'm definitely happy to jump in and talk about my experience also, but we'll get to that. If you could send a message to the school and say, this is what you're not seeing and understanding, what is it that you want them to understand better?
Yeah. Well, one of the things is goes back to the parents. So very often I see schools sort of taking the position that the parent is not, is just allowing the student to stay home and not being firm enough when the opposite is true. I mean, our clients want nothing more than for their child to get up in the morning and go to school. This is a struggle. It's a daily struggle. And so there needs to be more of an understanding, collaboration, working together to understand and dive in and get to the root of the problem, rather than making the assumption that the student just doesn't want to go to school or the parent is just not, being forceful enough. That's one thing that is just really, I see a lot.
It's frustrating.
It's very frustrating, for a parent. And worse yet, what we also see often is the schools take it even a step further. And, school districts are mandated reporters, and we understand that. But these situations, again, are not, it's not truancy. That's not what we're talking about. And we understand that students must go to school and the law requires there's compulsory education. But again, this is not a willful thing. If the students want to go to school, I mean, so often what we see, and I'm sure you see this also, is the beginning of the school year, the student wants to go and start and goes to school, and the first 2 weeks are good, and there's that honeymoon period. And why do we see that? Because the student wants it to work. There's no, predisposition. I'm not going to go to school. I'm going to get away with something. No. What happens is something kicks in. Something's going on. Whether the work is too difficult, the student may have a disability, the student may feel different for certain reasons. Sometimes there's bullying going on. There could be an anxiety for so many reasons. And so that has to be addressed
By
by the district in collaboration with the parent. And so instead of calling perhaps CPS and, having
creating a much bigger issue.
Yeah.
Right. So Child Protective Services is something that the school jumps to sometimes because they feel as mandated reporters that maybe there's educational neglect going on and they have to go and report it, which isn't the case. It's not that the parent is being negligible in getting their child to school. It's that the parent feels powerless in their ability to get the child to school. And you're saying that legally, there are things that the school district can do or is required to do that maybe they're not doing sometimes. But why? Why do you think it is? If you know the law, the school probably knows the law too, right? So what do you think's happening for the school that they're not doing what they should be doing legally to get the child back into school? What's happening for them?
I think that it's a lack of knowledge and understanding of the fact that this is an emotional issue.
They don't get it.
Yeah,
They really don't understand.
yeah. It's not that they are necessarily, choosing to be malicious and call CPS. That's what's necessarily happening. It's just it's working against the problem instead of trying to solve and work with the parents. So I think it's just a lack of knowledge, a lack of, options in their toolbox.
Yep. Because they don't know what options they need because they don't even know what tools to take out.
I don't think they know. They
Right?
only have so much in their toolbox that they know about. And so they'll go to that toolbox, but it's very limited. And then after that, they call CPS.
And that was something I was going to ask, like who ideally would be identifying this? So like the child is not going to school. I mean, so the principal gets involved and, and brings it to the social worker. I mean, who would the expectation be to kind of identify this as a mental health issue?
So very often it could be if the student has an IEP and has a disability, the issue would go to the CSC, the Committee on Special Education, along with the administration, the social worker, the principal, really, the guidance counselor. Really, everyone needs to, the way it should happen is work together. But we don't see it. We see a lot of sort of piecemeal intervention, and something I just sort of thought of when you brought up what the district does is when a student is younger, it's easier for perhaps the district to, or even the parent to physically bring the child, make sure that child goes to school. And once a kid is in middle school and high school, that's why we see more cases
Hmm.
of older students. There's only so much you can do. I
I
mean,
mean, you can't just pick your 15-year-old son up and put him over your shoulder and
right?
carry him into the building.
It's funny you're saying this because I know my husband's response would be like, "Nope, you just got to, you drop them off. They got to go to school. They
Mhm.
got to do it. You make them go." And
But that's the problem.
Mhm.
It's what you're saying right there, right? So I have so many questions for you on the legal end, but before we get to that, I feel the urge to jump in and just speak to the mental health piece that's going on and some of the things that I'm seeing. And it's really what you're speaking to. Um, I think I see it from the school and I see it from the parents. And so I don't think that the parents or the school means intentional harm to any of these kids at all. I think that it's the John mentality, right? It's the poor John. We're always picking on
I
John.
know.
One day he's going to watch these and be like, "Oh my God, you guys talk about me
You
all
might
the
have to
time."
bring him. You might have to bring him in.
Poor John, right? Everyone's going to need to meet John at some point. But anyway, we're just going to use him as an example, right?
'Cause he's good like that.
There's this idea that, like you were saying, it's not, a mental health issue, it's a behavior problem, right? And so if we come from the angle, whether we're the school or we're the parent, of this is behavioral, then we're going to want to address it behaviorally, right? You just
Mhm.
have to go. I'm the parent and I said so. You just have to go. Let's go. If you don't go, you're going to lose your privileges. You're going to lose this. I'm going to take this away. You're not going to be allowed to go to the party on Saturday, or I'm going to take your Xbox from you, or your phone is going to go in the toilet. Whatever it is, there's that, let me figure out through positive or negative reinforcement how I'm going to force the behavior to change. But when it's a mental health issue, it's not a behavior, it's a stress response that the child is having. They are going into fight or flight, flight, freeze in this instant. They're frozen. They're not able physically to bring themselves to the building for a multitude of reasons, right? And we could talk about what all those reasons are because there's so many different reasons why kids are shutting down emotionally and not able to bring themselves to school. But if you have a child with a mental health issue legitimately that is blocking them from being able to get up and go to school, it's like, being John and saying, you just got to go, right? It's like saying to a kid with a broken leg, just run, just get up and run. And if you don't, then I'm taking away your Xbox. Or if you don't, I'm calling Child Protective Services on you. Or if you don't, I'm doing this. Or if you don't, I'm doing that. Or if you do, I'll give you this or I'll give you that, right? We can't behavior plan away a mental health issue. And the problem with the mental health issues is number one, you can't see it. It's invisible, right? It's not the broken leg. So it's not as simple as, well, you can run with a broken leg. That's just stupid, right? But it's in the brain. It's something that is invisible to somebody who is not a trained professional and really understands all the nuances of mental health and anxiety and what anxiety is. There's this mentality of just get over it. Just stop it. There's nothing to be scared of. Or there's nothing to worry about. And I see all the time. And I, as the therapist, as the mental health professional, and as the practice owner who's seeing so many of these kids coming in, these parents are beside themselves. They
That's what
are
I see.
pulling
Absolutely.
their hair out of their head.
Trying
They
to
are,
do whatever they can to get
yeah,
their kid to
they're
go.
overwhelmed. They're sad. They're scared. They're angry. They're embarrassed. They're ashamed. There's so many negative emotions flowing through them. They're trying everything. They're punishing. They're yelling. They're threatening. They're promising rewards. They're doing everything they possibly can. Trust me. These parents are not like, so don't go to school. Who cares, right? None of them.
I'm curious, how often are the districts calling you and your therapists to get input on what's happening, and to what degree are they utilizing whatever feedback you're able to provide?
All the time. Sometimes so much so to the point that the therapists that are working under me that I supervise start to feel an enormous amount of pressure and stress. The kid's still not coming to school. And the therapist is like, I've only seen him 3 times. We're still getting to know each other. All we've done so far is play Uno, right? We're building rapport. We're building a safe space. Like we haven't even, like, we don't know yet why this child isn't going. And that is the most important piece. Why? We need to get to the why. But here on Long Island, and I know it's not the same everywhere, but we're noticing once the child comes into therapy and that school becomes aware that the child's in therapy, they're right on top of us. What's going on? What's the plan? When is the kid going to come back to school? What's the reason they're not coming? What can we do? And we work, and I will definitely say all districts are not the same. Some of them are wonderful. Some of them are not, right? I'm sure you see it too, right? You know who you're suing, right? So you know who's not wonderful, right? But they really, I think, are coming from a place of, we don't know what we're doing. And I feel badly for them because I think I've experienced it, and I know you have too, because we've talked about this. A lot of these people at the schools, the school psychologists, the school social workers, and even the principals sometimes really care so deeply about these students. They really want to do the right thing, but they don't know what the right thing is. I have experienced school psychologists, sometimes the school social workers, saying to the parents, you need to take things away from them. Take their phone away. Tell them if they don't, you can't let them sit home and play video games all day and expect that if you take it away, then they'll come to school. I remember about 2 years ago saying to a school psychologist about a particular student that was coming to us, if you you're telling the parent to take all these things away so that he has nothing to do while he's home during the day. And if he has nothing to
Then he'll
do,
want to go to school.
he'll realize that this isn't fun and he'll want to go to school. And I said to this psychologist, I don't think you're understanding the mental illness that we're dealing with here with this particular student. And I'm telling you right now that if you suggest this to these parents and these parents do what you're suggesting to them, this child's going to end up in the hospital. I can see it right in front of me. And the psychologist said to me, I don't know how long you've been doing this, but I've been in the field for 25 years and I know what I'm talking about, and I'm a behaviorist. And if they do what I am telling them to do, this kid is going to be back in school within 3 days. And I said, I've been doing this for 27 years, but this isn't a
Boom.
contest. And I'm telling you, I know this kid, and what I'm hearing, this kid's going to end up in the hospital if we do this. This is not a choice. And I'll say what I always say when I do all of my ADHD classes. Kids will do well when they can. If they're not doing well, it's because there's a reason. No kid wakes up in the morning, believe it or not, parents, they're not like, I'm going to ruin my parents' life. I'm going to make them be
Gonna
late
fail
for
math.
work. Yep, I'm going to manipulate everybody and just be a complete dick and refuse to go to school just because I think it's fun and I don't want to go. That's never the case. Never, ever, ever, ever. So these parents listened to this school psychologist, and this kid ended up in the hospital.
We see a lot of kids ending up in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
We see things going in a really bad direction when it isn't handled properly.
Mm-hmm.
We see kids wind up in residential settings or private school placements that can provide, a smaller, more nurturing kind of setting.
So there are schools that offer that.
There are, but the reality and the irony is that when that happens, school districts wind up paying for those schools because parents wind up bringing in lawyers and there's the law and there's a fight, and often
Yeah.
you do the math and you look at the big picture and you say to yourself, wouldn't funds be better expended? Sort of just
Providing the services within their district
right,
to
providing the
accommodate that.
services and bringing in trainers and understanding what the student needs and trying to provide it within the public school system. So it can get really bad. I mean, we've seen, terrible, outcomes, but we've also seen when, nipped in the bud early, the earlier the better. And if addressed properly earlier on, the situation does not have to escalate to those points.
So let's talk about it dressed properly, because the reality is, Sue, and which is an amazing thing and a testament to who you are, is even though you are the attorney, right, who fights with the schools, you're here because you want to help them.
And I have to say, I mean, you've got an incredible understanding of mental health issues and the impact on education. And I'm just kind of thinking principals, administrators, having them, expecting them to kind of understand this, that it is a mental health thing and not a behavioral thing. I mean, is kind of putting a lot on the district. I mean, obviously there should be social workers, psychologists, someone involved that would get that and be able to say to them, hey, we're going about this wrong.
Well, look, I mean, they're in a position where they need to look at the big picture and look at the numbers and see that there's a pattern and there's a problem, and reallocate funds. And so that's what has to happen. They need to sort of look at this as they do with other issues and figure out, okay, how are we going to tackle this? Do we need to bring in folks that specialize in school anxiety to understand exposure therapy or whatever it is? And it's going to be different for each student.
Exactly. That's a really important point to make,
Yeah.
right? It's not a one size fits all. It really depends on what it is that's causing that student the anxiety about going to school. And as an attorney and as a mental health provider, there are so many different reasons. And sometimes exposure therapy works really, really well, right? If it's a one incident occurrence, something happened, the kid feels really embarrassed by something, and now they're just afraid to go back to school, slowly introducing them back into the building. And some districts are so wonderful. I've had schools, I remember one district in particular, the school social worker was walking halfway to the kid's house and meeting the kid on the corner.
Wow.
And walking her into the building and letting her spend first period in her office. They'd given her a truncated schedule.
Right.
So first period was an off period, and the kid would spend first period in the school social worker's office, and the school social worker would work on grounding and acclimating her into the building before she would go into classes. And that was such an amazing, thing to do for this kid. This woman really got it. And that was amazing. But
and
that's not
just
going to work
thinking-
for everybody.
Well, and I'm also thinking, I mean, a school has 500, 1,000 kids and one social worker. So now they've
Sometimes they
dedicated-
don't even have one.
Yeah,
so
they're splitting one
sometimes it's
among-
one
yep.
per district.
Yep.
One for 5 different buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's amazing that person really went well above and beyond, but, that can't be the expectation, unfortunately. Schools are not funded to be able to provide that.
Part of the problem,
Yeah.
right? They don't have the knowledge, and sometimes they don't have the resources. So what becomes a solution here?
And, to your point, that it has to be handled very differently according to the student.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, exposure therapy wouldn't work at all
Nope.
for the student, for example, that we see who has dyslexia and isn't able, but is smart, cognitively bright, and so is in all of the general education classes and all with neurotypical peers every day,
Mhm.
but can't sort of keep up and feels different and doesn't know why they can't keep up, and is being asked to get up and read in front of their class and knows that they're struggling and is embarrassed.
So embarrassed.
So embarrassed
And
and
it's traumatizing.
feels dumb and feels stupid. I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many parents tell me, my kid just tells me, I'm dumb. I'm so dumb. I can't do it. And
Aw.
they're not. They're bright. But that's a situation that needs to be identified in a different way. We need to get an evaluation, a neuropsychological evaluation, or a psycho educational evaluation that really administers the right
Recommendations.
educational, the instruments that will uncover an academic deficit, and then get in there to the CSE and hone the students' educational program so that they don't feel so different and, stigmatized, and perhaps, the teacher won't call on them. It's a simple modification. It doesn't cost the district anything to recognize the student, you shouldn't call on the student to read out loud in front of their peers. It's a simple modification, but it could be everything. I mean,
But
kids
then
won't
you're
want to get
talking
up.
about kids that have IEPs. What about, that's a small group of children within a school or a district. So what about the parents of the kids that have a classification or, special an IEP, or kind of, running under the radar for the school, that they
Yeah.
don't even know about them until this starts happening?
That's why the evaluations are so important, right? I think one of the things that, I come across, and I think you can let us know, is parents that don't get the evals, or they don't want to get the evals
Yeah.
because they're afraid to label their child. What does it mean if my child has something? Why is it important to know that? Because the reality is if we know that the child has dyslexia, we know that the child has dyscalculia, we know that the child has a processing disorder, then we can really look to the professional to give us the appropriate educational recommendations. So now we can go to the school and say, hey, school,
Okay.
these are the things that this kid needs. So let's start doing that. The other thing is, maybe something you can speak to more better than I can is 504s, and what a 504 is for the child that maybe didn't have an evaluation and doesn't have an IEP.
Yeah. So you're right when you talk about evaluations. Everything starts with the evaluation,
Mhm.
and it's so important to get a comprehensive, independent evaluation to understand what's going on. For really, it's just to know what's happening with your own child. Number one,
Mhm.
but number two, we can't, as lawyers, we need to know, and it's our ammunition, or the basis that we will, fight to get a child what they need, or the, environment that they need. Or really, we need the clinicians, because we're just the lawyers. We can't go in there and say, you've got to give this to this student because they feel uncomfortable. No, we need data. We need data by, the clinicians and the experts, because if we have to bring it forward and litigate a case, we need witnesses and experts and a reason. So evaluations are just key, and they're so important.
Mhm.
And I always, I often will encourage parents to do that. Sometimes parents do come in and they're afraid, or they don't want the label, but you know, their knowledge is power. You need to know what's going on with your child. But to your question about the 504s, I mean, 504 plans differ from IEPs in many ways. It's a different statute. 504 is actually an anti-discrimination statute that imposes less affirmative
I know.
sort of
Like, oh,
impositions on a district. The IDEA, which students get, IEPs are derived under, it was more of an affirmative obligation for the districts. There's a whole host of rules and affirmative duties and rules that they must follow, and there's more accountability
Mhm.
and so if there's a way that a student can be eligible for an IEP as opposed to a 504 plan,
Mhm.
which an attorney can look at the situation and determine based upon whatever evaluations. I always suggest that's the avenue that we go, because it allows for more protection.
and I'm as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, the family and the getting an evaluation from an expert.
Mhm.
I'm thinking that's white middle class school districts is one thing, but some of the poor families are not going to even be educated to know that they need that, nor would they be able to afford to pay for a neuropsychologist to do testing and identify that. They don't even know that they need it, or they don't even know that an attorney could assist. That they
Yeah.
could obtain an attorney.
Yeah.
And
That's such a great point, and that's why a lot of what we do is educate parents as to their rights, and there has to be more of that. But in terms of the evaluations, there is a process in the law that allows for independent educational evaluations where the school district pays for that evaluation. In instances where they've performed an evaluation and the parent, says they disagree or they want a more comprehensive evaluation, the district will, in those cases, pay for an independent educational evaluation. Again, parents have to know that they have that right, but those are situations where they wouldn't have to pay because I'll be honest, an evaluation could be $5,000, can be anywhere from, let's say, $3,500 to
yeah, that
$8,000.
most people
And a lot of
don't
people,
have.
right?
Yep.
That's right.
And don't even know that they need it. I mean, I
right.
had a friend that, had their son was kind of struggling with stuff and, it's like, call Stacy. She'll know what to do with this. Cause I mean, I had absolutely no idea like what the process would be, how
Yep.
to help him get his son's needs met at
Right.
the school.
People don't.
Yeah.
And that's why what you said earlier about not even knowing that, education lawyers exist.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that are unaware of their rights, but parents have so many rights under the law, and they are meaningful participants by law at CSE meetings. They must be able to voice their concerns. They are allowed to bring in other people who are knowledgeable about their child. Private evaluations must be considered by the by school districts. There's just so much that they can do to exercise their rights. But again, they need to know about the fact that they do have rights on behalf of their children.
And these evaluations are helpful to the kids and the school.
Mhm.
Because the reality is if you have a neuropsychologist do an evaluation on a child and say, hey, look, we've discovered this learning disability, and there's so many different things, right? Whatever it is. And this is something that would be helpful. That's solving a problem for the school.
Yep. It kind of offers a blueprint. They need extra time. They need whatever.
Right. They need a specific way of learning reading. Right.
Well, but it sounds great.
Uh-oh.
But
Uh-oh.
It sounds
But-
great, but it also costs money.
yeah,
It costs money
to the school. Mhm.
to bring
those
in
accommodations.
a specialized reading instructor who is certified, not just trained in Wilson or this particular methodology based upon the child's, the type of dyslexia that they have. I mean, there's a cost. And so what we have to realize is that although there may be a cost, it costs the district more to pay for a student's private and unilateral placement when
Mhm.
they wind up the parents wind up placing them at this private school because they can't go to school anymore because they're so upset, and this private school provides the particular reading methodology. I mean, it's the same issue over and over that we see. And again, the anxiety is for so many reasons, but the academics is big. I mean, there's a lot of kids are not receiving what they need within the school district, and you know what? They feel embarrassed. They don't want to go to school.
Yeah. So just to clarify, right, what you're saying, the cycle here is you've got the kid who potentially has dyslexia and they can't read. And they're going to school, and maybe there hasn't been a neuropsych eval where they've done an educational evaluation. So nobody really knows that they have dyslexia and they can't read. And they're going to school every day and they're feeling inadequate and they're feeling embarrassed and they're feeling bad about themselves, right? This feeling, right, is now trapped within their body. They're experiencing it somatically. They're going into school and they're going into fight, flight, freeze, right? This is what's happening in their body. and they don't even know why and they don't even recognize it. Because a lot of times you can ask these kids, why don't you want to go to school? What's happening for you? And they don't even know. They just know that they don't like how they feel when they're there. And they don't necessarily even know why. They just know that when they get there, this horrible feeling comes over them that is unmanageable to them. And they want to avoid it because it just feels too big and unmanageable and scary for them. So they are shutting down physically, they are shutting down mentally and emotionally. And now, the reality is that if the school knew this kid has dyslexia and if we administered this special kind of reading, even though it's expensive, now this child isn't going to feel inadequate. This child isn't going to have school refusal and school avoidance, right? They're going to come to school and everything is going to be, okay.
And they can stay within their home
Hmm.
zoned school district, within their
Hmm.
community, with their peers in the least restrictive environment, which is what the law requires.
Right,
But it has to be appropriate,
right,
which is also what the law requires.
right. So, what's happening, what you're seeing is that the schools are not making the parents aware of their rights and them not making them aware of the neuropsych evals. They're not doing the evaluations themselves to that extent. They're not finding the dyslexia. They're not offering the specialized reading. The child is struggling to the point where they can't take it anymore. They shut down. They stop going to school. Now the school's calling CPS on the parents because the kid's not going to school. The parent is struggling because they can't get the kids to go to school. You come in, and now the school district is paying $1 million. Not really, I'm exaggerating, but they're paying all this money for them to go to this private school, and maybe that wouldn't have been necessary.
Right. Or even just if it doesn't even come to that, hiring their own lawyer, paying for their own lawyer
Yeah.
now to negotiate
Yeah.
with the parent's lawyer. A lot of these issues can be dealt with, you know, within the public schools.
And the toll it takes on the kid,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why they're in therapy because their self esteem is down the toilet. They don't feel good about themselves. They feel inadequate. They feel ashamed. They're in so much pain. The parents are in pain and they're angry at the school, and the school, I think, part of the problem is feeling that they don't have the funding, even though they might be able to find it if they reallocated where things are going, or they invested a little bit in understanding and learning how to deal with it or what to do a little bit differently. Sometimes, don't you find that it's as simple as speaking to the child differently? Or just having a 504 that says this child doesn't have to read in front of the class, or this child doesn't have to sit in front of the room, or this child can be a few minutes late to class.
Some of it is really very basic.
Stuff that doesn't cost anything.
Right. 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 And also stuff that, a teacher that it just gets it and is plugged in
Mhm.
would do automatically anyway. And often it does happen. But then the next year, it's a new teacher. Or the next year, the student goes to middle school and now they have 4 different teachers. And so everybody has to understand and follow those accommodations. And not everybody does.
And I think you bring up a good point. Like the teacher has to get it and recognize it. And I'm thinking back, like my daughter had a teacher that would let her get up and, she would ask her every day to go and like bring this down to the office or to go and get this, recognizing that she couldn't sit still for that long. She needed to get up
The movement
and
break.
walk.
It's
Yep.
so easy. That's written
And
as a
she
movement
just
break.
very, quietly without, ever having a conversation with me or, just knew that my daughter needed that and just did it. But that's, an exceptional teacher.
It's, I think, what needs to happen. And really, by law, if there is an IEP and there is a modification and accommodation that warrants something like that, every teacher is mandated
Required to
to
do that.
know
Mhm.
about that and to implement it. So,
Why do you think they're not? Because sometimes they're not, even though it's in the IEP and it's there. I think we both see teachers that are not necessarily, or sometimes districts that are not necessarily following the IEP. What's going on for the school that they're not doing that?
There's a lot of kids, the teachers are busy, everybody, is trying to get through
Yeah.
the day. Again, this sometimes if the class is a general education class or an ICT class, there's 25, 29 kids in a class. This is why often, some of our kids do better in a smaller setting. But the problem can be that, the self-contained classes in public schools often have students that have lower cognitive profiles. So
Yeah.
it's not appropriate for every child. I mean, you have to also think of the academic piece. So if it doesn't exist, then we need to either implement the modifications or consider perhaps an alternative setting. And there are alternative settings even within the public school district. It doesn't have to result in a unilateral placement and lawyers and suing the school district for tuition funding. School districts can recommend a New York State approved private school. They're on the list, but they have to be willing to recognize that within their continuum of service, they might not be able to meet the needs of every child. It's not a one size fits all, just not.
Yeah. Enforcing it when it's not appropriate can really cause a lot of damage and trauma to the child. And I think sometimes, it's really important for us to send that message to the parents. Sometimes it's not necessarily the school. I've seen situations where the school is recommending an alternative placement and they recognize the need and the parent doesn't want to do it
Right.
because it's painful for them. They're having a hard time with it. They're grieving for the child they thought they were going to have. And it's so hard for them to accept that their child is not going to thrive in this setting. And they feel like they're giving up on them or they're letting them down, or maybe they feel embarrassed or ashamed, or they feel sad and they just, let's just try a little bit longer. Let's just try a little bit longer. I don't want to pull my kid out or take them away from their friend or have to tell other people my kid wasn't able to go
Yeah.
to regular school. They had to go someplace else. It's not easy. It is not easy, but the reality is they're going to be okay. It's so important that they be in the right place because if they're in the I say to parents all the time, and I'm so passionate about this. We want these kids to come out the other side of this thing called school at the end of the day and still like themselves. That's the most important thing, right? It's not what placement they're at. It's that they're at the placement that is going to give them the opportunity to feel empowered and smart and good about themselves, or they're going to find their strengths. And they're not going to be in a setting that points out every single day what their weaknesses are. And, I say to parents all the time, if your kid sucks at math and they spend more time doing math than anything else, what do you think is going to happen to your child and their self
True.
esteem?
It's true.
It's not what they should spend most of their time doing if that's something that they really struggle with. If your kid has dyscalculia, they should not be doing math 62 times a day, right?
It's true. Or, and again, small modifications. Homework should be, if math, perhaps, three problems instead of 25 problems.
Yeah.
Now these kids are going home and doing homework, which is like an extension of the school day. And, we're talking tears and hours of, trying to get it done, and parents trying to, manage everything else, other children, jobs, dinner.
So much stress.
It is so much, not just for the child, but for a whole family.
Yeah.
So it just has to be looked at in a bigger sort of context.
Yeah. And I think that there could be so much more collaborating between the parents and the schools. I think that they definitely go head to head. I see parents blaming schools. I see schools blaming parents. Everybody wants to blame somebody.
Yeah.
The parents are angry at the kid. The kid's angry at everybody around them. And being angry and pointing fingers isn't going to find the solution.
No, 100%. And so That's a good point because parents sometimes say, "Oh, I don't know, should I bring in a lawyer? I have other kids in the district and I don't want anything to happen or them to retaliate against my other child, or I don't want to appear adversarial." So, I mean, the reality is that, so long as you're bringing in lawyers that are reasonable and have a certain type of approach, which is, you're going in there to enforce the law, but not point fingers and just handle things a certain way. It's just basic common sense. It's how we deal with other humans.
Yeah.
That's how we can start to tackle a problem. Are there times when it does get adversarial where we're litigating and fighting in the courtroom? Yes. But the majority of these situations, really just need sometimes some communication, collaboration, acknowledgement that the district is trying. But you know what? A teacher can only do what they can do. And if an
Yeah.
IEP doesn't tell them they have to implement certain things, then you know what? It's not their fault. But at the CSE meeting, where decisions are made as to what that teacher has to do, I mean, let's go back to that room. Let's start talking about what we can do. Let's work together. I mean, that really is what the law says should be
Yeah, I
happening.
think that's a great point you bring up, right? Because that's something that we see a lot is that the IEPs themselves aren't appropriate. And I think, my experience anyway is that a lot of that is coming from them not really knowing what to do, right? Especially since the school refusal has, become such a huge problem just in the last few years, right? I think that a lot of the schools that I talk to anyway are so overwhelmed by the amount of children that are just refusing to come to school. They're overwhelmed by it, like beyond overwhelmed. There's one after another that is just not coming to school. And I think that, I mean, I've sat in on a lot of these CSE meetings and, just going there, for the client that, is coming to the counseling center, and we're trying to work collaboratively with the
Yeah.
kid and the school, and like, let's figure this out together. What does this kid need? We're trying to be helpful on both ends because it's a win-win for everybody if we could figure out the answer, right? So I look at a lot of these IEPs and I say, I think there's good intention here. I think we mean well. We put an IEP together. We're taking the time out to implement certain accommodations, but these are the wrong accommodations, right? Like we were talking about before, like an exposure plan for a kid who has dyslexia is going to backfire. But an exposure plan for a kid who maybe has a one incident trauma where they got embarrassed in class one time and that's the only issue, maybe that could be helpful for that particular student, right?
So how
Maybe.
does a parent know that the IEP isn't appropriate?
They don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know. And but the school doesn't know either.
Yeah.
That's
So
the
the school's trying to
problem.
make accommodations and they're not the right accommodations. So the child is continuing to fail.
Well, that's where an independent evaluation comes in to really figure out what's going on in a more comprehensive way. Because the truth is that the district's evaluations are limited. They are basic. They can be cursory, and they do what they're supposed to do in order to develop goals. Yes, but sometimes a child is a little more complex than that. And sometimes you have to do a specific test that might measure executive functioning deficits, perhaps, or a diagnostic test that really dives into the emotional piece. Um, and so, again, the evaluation is key. Parents have to know that they have that option, but
Right. We can't behavior plan away mental illness,
right.
and we can't behavior plan away neurodivergence, right? Talk about this in another podcast. If a child has ADHD, for example, we can't, put a behavior chart on the kid's desk and expect them to be able to pay attention for a sticker, right? But I think the school means well when they put these accommodations in place, perhaps, and thinks this
Yeah.
is the answer because they have behaviorists that are telling them this is the answer, but it's not. It's about, educating them about what is the right thing to do. And it's about empowering the parents to be able to get the right experts in to be able to give the appropriate recommendations to the school so that we can actually do something. If you're going to take the time and the money to put an IEP in place, let's put the
Make
right
one that's
goals on
useful.
the
Yep.
IEP, right? Let's tackle the memory issues. Let's tackle the organizational and time management issues. Let's tackle those things, the emotional regulation issues. Let's not look at it from a behavioral approach if it's stress.
I'm curious, have you seen contracts that districts have asked parents to have their child sign that they will sort of, go to school a certain number of days and do this, do that, or complete
Yes.
their tasks? You've seen that?
Yes. I usually give them a ring and very kindly say to them, I appreciate the time and effort that you put into this. I know that you mean well and you care very much about this child because a lot of times they do, but this isn't going to help. It's just going to give the child more stress and it's going to shut them down even more for the most part.
So again, you're talking to the parents of a child who's in therapy, who has an IEP.
Sometimes they don't have the IEP
Okay,
yet when
but
they
at
come to
least,
us.
the parent has recognized that their child needs therapy. So what can we tell parents out there who are just dealing with the school refusal and knew none of this? Didn't know that any of this existed, advocacy or attorneys or the school's requirement to provide an education
So
for a
let's
child.
do this in two parts. Let's tell the parents what they need to do from the education attorney and the legal standpoint, and I can talk about what they need to do on a mental health level. Want
Okay.
to go
Yeah.
first?
So,
You're the
yeah,
guest.
since I'm the
You
guest.
go first.
So, yeah, I mean, we would really need to review, if there is an IEP, um, the records and do a full, very, comprehensive consultation with the parents to figure out whether we know what the source of the anxiety is, or whether, or we might think we know, but we might not have the data to show it. So let's say we know, well, we might have to go get the proof of that. So we would recommend, uh, you know, getting that evaluation. And there is a process, and they would have to sort of work with us if they wanted to sort of get through the process of getting the district to see. It's not like a magic, answer. Unfortunately, it's a process. But and every child is different and every situation is different. But we would look at everything very closely, try to figure out what we need further, if what data we need, and then we go in there, not going in there to fight, going in there to enforce the law. And that's how we would tackle. It's how we tackle every case.
And I wish we had more time because we spent so much time kind of talking about educational issues. And, Stacey, you had brought up when we first started, like the idea of, a child refusing to go to school for bullying. So, which is a much harder thing to, there's not neuro evaluations and IEPs for something like that.
There is a law for it, though.
Yes.
There is, and that
Mhm.
Yep.
really is a topic for another day because there's so much there, and we deal with many bullying cases. There's such an overlap.
Yeah, because I know you've told me in the past, and I've learned from you that schools are also legally obligated to provide a safe environment for a child. And if there's bullying going on and they're not addressing it,
The school
They're not
would be,
following
yeah.
the
then
law.
they're following the law. Yep, absolutely. So that's a whole other conversation that we can certainly have. Um, so the mental health part of what parents can do in terms of school refusal for anxiety. So first and foremost, I want to say, number one, this is a very common issue now. I think that we have to really address the fact that it is a changed world. And, I hate to blame everything on COVID, but COVID definitely plays a role in why there's an uptick. Did this exist before COVID? Yes, 100%. This is not all about COVID. But since COVID and since a lot of the way that kids interact is virtual through technology, and they've gotten a taste of what it was like to stay home to not have to go to school. I'll tell you this, a lot of what we see are kids who had mental health problems before COVID,
Mm.
right? Going to school. We see a lot of kids who have, cutting. I don't mean cutting class, I mean like cutting,
Self-harm.
self-harm and depression and anxiety and just are in so much pain. Then COVID happens and they have to stay home and they have to do school from home. And they noticed that all their mental health problems went away. They didn't have anxiety, they didn't have depression, they stopped cutting. And then all of a sudden, you got to go back. And they were like, hell no, I'm doing better. I don't want to go back there. When I'm there, it makes me feel like this. So there's definitely a lot of that has gone on over the last couple of years. But aside from that, you've got kids who really don't know how to interact socially in person in a setting. They become masters at virtual interaction, and that's become the norm in so many things. I mean, I was just talking to a colleague the other day. We have to do, CEU trainings for our profession and for our license every 3 or 4 years. We have to get 36 CEU credits. It's so hard to find one in person. Everything is freaking virtual.
Yeah.
My daughter just graduated from college and she went to in-person school. And I will tell you, the last 2 semesters of college that I paid a fortune for in-person school, only one of her classes was in person. And it was because the classes she had to take, none of them were offered in person. They were all virtual. So there's so many activities and so many things that children interact in virtually, and then they're forced to go in person for in-person learning and to be around all of their peers. And there's definitely, in my opinion, and I think some of the research shows this as well, if you look it up, there's definitely empirical data on it, that there's definitely a lag in children's ability to interact socially. Their development is behind. And this is across the board. This is from preschool all upwards into young adult at this point, because even the babies that were babies, in 2020 and 2021, and now are like 5 years old, they're behind developmentally because of this changing world, because they got parents that are working from home that are like, why should I bother to put my kid in daycare or to hire a babysitter? I could save money by just putting electronics in front of my kid, put the TV on, give them an iPad, and I can get some work done on and off and interact with them here and there. The kids are not getting the same interaction with other humans and with their parents that they need to develop, developmentally. Like they just are not developing. So we see a lot of problems in the schools and a lot of inadequacies and a lot of anxiety that kids are coming in with across the board, ages 5 through 18, that are struggling and falling behind. And they don't even know themselves what's going on. They just know that they feel inadequate and uncomfortable in the environment that they're in. They go into fight or flight, right? Their prefrontal lobe shuts down. Their brain's filled with cortisol. They're all stressed out. Their executive function stopped working. Their emotional regulation, stops working. And they're just like, I don't want to be here. This is really uncomfortable. And it becomes a major, major, major problem. So parents,
It's just going to stop you on your roll and say, what
I
can a
know,
parent do?
Parents, give yourselves a break. Stop beating yourself up and say to yourself, you know what? This isn't a fail on my part. This isn't a fail on my kid's part. This doesn't mean I've done something wrong as a parent. This doesn't mean that there's something wrong with my child. Let's figure out what is happening and let's figure out what we can do and know that everything is temporary. Things pass. A child who goes through, school refusal and anxiety, it doesn't mean that they're not going to function like normal humans as they get older in life. I went through a little bit of this with my daughter when she was in 8th grade. And she went to college, went to in-person classes when she could, when they existed, and she graduated and she's doing fine. And so we have to know that we have to get to the other side of the grief and the feelings of I thought my little person that I gave birth to was going to be perfect, and now if they're not, I did something wrong. I failed. They're a failure. Something's wrong. I'm embarrassed. We have to not project how we're feeling. We have to say, let's be little investigators. Let's, investigate. Let's figure out what's going on. Is it social media? Is it bullying? Is it a learning disability? Is it feelings of inadequacy? Is it, a social ineptness that's coming from neurodivergence or from a lack of, socialization because of this changed world that we're in? There's so many reasons why a kid shuts down and refuses to go to school. But if we get to the bottom of the why, then we know how to handle it because there's so many different approaches. And, one thing I'll say for the schools here on Long Island at this point, I'm starting to see a recognition for the fact that this is an issue that they need to understand and learn more about. They have asked me to come in starting in the school year in the fall, in September, to come into the schools and start training staff on how to handle this more effectively. So that's a good start. And I think Sue, that's exactly what you were talking about before. Allocate some of the funds in a place that makes sense. And it looks like, thankfully, some of the schools are starting to do that now because they're starting to realize this is
It's
more
not
than
going
just
away.
behavior. It's
And
not going away. We can't behavior chart away this problem.
You know, I've been doing this for a while, and so I've seen school districts sort of go through the process of realizing that you know, there's a certain kind of a student and issues we're seeing over and over again. And an example of where I have seen progress is with the student who's on the spectrum that's high functioning. But I remember the days where these kids were just there was no understanding, and they're in regular education classes, and yet they had social issues, and yet they needed certain supports, but it doesn't make sense because the kid's so smart, so why do they need certain things? In any event,
Yeah.
I do see that there are programs on Long Island now that and a recognition of certain a certain type of student. I feel like with this issue with anxiety and the school related avoidance, we're going to see a shift so long as districts, entertain learning.
Mm,
I think it's great that you're going in there.
I'm excited about
Oh,
it.
that's so awesome. And
Yeah.
I think we're going to get there.
Yeah.
But I feel like it takes time. There has to be an awareness first.
It's new.
It is relatively
It's a new epidemic, really.
relatively speaking, it is new.
It's overwhelming for the parents and the schools alike.
Yeah.
And so, for our viewers or listeners who are in New York, don't hesitate to reach out to Susan Didi. She's amazing. Don't hesitate to call a therapist if you're not sure what to do. There's so many therapists who are really trained and gaining a better understanding of what is going on here and what to do. And they can also offer some advocacy and guidance. If you're not in New York, you're not working outside of New York, right? You're
I'm
only in New
not,
York.
but the IDEA and many of the is a federal law, and so it applies. So we can provide guidance to parents throughout the nation.
Yep, wherever you are, just know that this service exists, right? Even if it's not with Sue, there's advocates, there's attorneys, and there's therapists like myself and the wonderful, amazing therapists in my practice who have taken the time to learn and spend their time calling the school social workers and
Yeah.
calling the school psychologists. And some of them are so amazing, and they're like, "Help us, please, please tell us what to do. We'll work with you." And it's so amazing when we have those experiences that you see how much a lot of these people in the schools really do care and want to learn and want to do the right thing. And if we all work together and we learn, right? You said before, information is power, right? Whether we're the parents or the schools, it
Right.
can make such an amazing difference in the lives of these children, and that's why we're here, right? We want to help these kids.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you for being
Yeah.
here. I
This
love
was really
talking to you.
wonderful. Yep. I think we all learned a lot. Well, you guys didn't learn a lot. I learned a lot, and our viewers learned a lot. Our listeners.
Yeah. Any last thoughts? Anything that's kind of burning in your brain over there that you didn't get to say that you think is important to leave people?
Just understand that, there are laws that protect you, and there are ways and resources out there to uncover what's going on.
Yep. Awesome.
Yep.
Yep. So we hope that was helpful. So with that, wait a minute. Before we end,
Where can people find us?
people, don't forget to subscribe wherever you are watching or listening so that you can be reminded when there are new episodes, because it's so helpful to you and it is so helpful to the podcast, right?
Yes.
For us to keep being able to be here and, teach you about amazing things, right? So I think that's it, right? We're on YouTube, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify,
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio.
It's the only place I listen to podcasts.
Heather's so happy about iHeartRadio.
It's the only thing I know how to use.
Yeah. Subscribe, rate us, tell everybody how amazing you think our podcast is, share it with a friend.
Make suggestions for topics you might want to learn more about.
Yeah,
Find
we'd
out why
love
do
to
people
hear from
do
you.
things.
Why do people do that? All right. So with that said, I am Stacy,
And I'm Heather.
and this was
Why Do People Do That?
See you next time.
Why Do People Do That is recorded and produced by Press Record Studios.